Charlie Chaplin's early films are really a childhood memory. I think one of the first films I saw of a silent film at a summer camp, and I was 9 years old. And now I can't really remember whether my instinct is that it may have been the pawn shop or the rink, but there was a pianist, hacking away in a corner and a screen and a lot of kids, and I've never forgotten it as an experience. I just wish I could remember which one it was, but it sort of is always there. I remember what it felt like even today, and now we're a long way off from then. But there was always something fabulous. And when later on, when I actually had to provide music for these films, that 9-year-old memory is still very strong in my whole sort of psyche, really. But I had a lot of Chaplin in my professional life. First scoring the Hollywood series, then a series called Unknown Chaplin, and then finally doing restorations of Chaplin's own scores, like City Lights, which we did in 1989. I followed, which was so successful, I said, come on, let's do another. And we then did The Gold Rush and The Kid. So this created a sort of new aspect to a Chaplin industry. When we got to the year 2000, my colleagues and I were sort of cut off from our relationship with Channel 4, but I wanted to go on working on silent film on my own, and I thought, what's a project that's sort of special and could be focused as a sort of big project. And I thought of the 12 mutuals as a sort of something I would do. I keep saying it's my version of Wagner's Ring. It was something immense, and it would be fun. I'd already at that point scored The Immigrant, because simply out of passion, not a commission or anything, just because I wanted to do it. I thought that was a very important film to do. And then finally, in the mid tens of the 21st century, I got myself together and I said, I'm going to do them all. That then coincided with working with the British Film Institute, which was beginning to put together their project. And I said, let's do it together. And across that 10 years or so since, I created the 12 and recorded them. In general, I think of Charlie and his early years in Victorian and Edwardian London, and growing up kind of trained really on the street, in bars, later on in variety theaters, in music hall. And to me, the whole musical world of Chaplin belongs before the First World War, the first decade of his life, when one receives the strongest musical and artistic memories and experiences, when they're most intense. And to me, he belongs to this pre-jazz age, I think he can, in his experience, he might be up to ragtime, which was already popular in the 1890s. But so that when I sit down to write my own music for a Chaplin film, because Charlie never scored the mutuals, so they didn't belong to him. And he sort of, I wouldn't say he was indifferent to them, but it never formed part of the deals that he made in 1917 and 18 with forming United Artists. They were always ignored. They were enormously successful, but they were scattered around the globe in all different versions, sizes, and shapes. So this project in 2000 was really very important, to try and collect as much good material as possible. And my whole feeling about the silence and film music in general is that the wonderful thing about it is you go anywhere in film. It's incredibly eclectic, meaning many styles, many sources. It should go from classical music to the latest pop music. Of course, the latest pop music, because I'm very sensitive thing about actually going beyond what the actual film is doing. We have films that are made, the latest date is 1917, and I'm try to be cautious not to make it feel as if it came from a later point. So my jazz is when I choose to write in a jazz idiom, is very conservative, and has to do with ragtime. Blues, of course, was there. So you can be blue, you can be jazzy, you can do dance band, you can look up the popular dances of the period. People danced like mad, and so read into that. At the same time, there's a strong leaning towards classical music. I mean, Charlie in his own scores, which he started to make from 1930 with City Lights, are full of quotes. I mean, quotes of Wagner and everything you can imagine. Anything you needed, you could turn your hand to. The copyright laws. Well, they attacked him at one point over City Lights, but in the main, there it all is, and it's all available to be used in the film. So there are no rules, nothing stopping you. So when I came to do my own scores for the Mutuals, again, I was very cautious about the period, very cautious about the mood, the particular mood. It's made by a young man, Charlie in his late 20s. It has a lovely feeling of a kind of rep company. There's a tight nucleus of artists who appear in each of the films. It's just a lovely period, and terribly important from the Chaplin, the history of his own development as a filmmaker, because he starts very much rooted in the Keystone Cops and at the same time, peculiarly enough, heavy plots. Even in a two-reeler, they try to get a lot of plot in, and so the first three of the 12 really have spend a lot of time on plotting. So that required musically quite a little dramatic understanding, because the plots are really rather serious. I mean, there's a huge theft in the first, in the Fireman. There's a scam about burning, an insurance scam. In the third, about a kidnapping of a young girl and her discovery and release, and all these are kind of big, and that's kind of very interesting musically, because there's a big separation between the comedy and the plot. So I had to do that there is this strong dramatic sense in them. At the same time, even in the first one, I have my own little private joke of quoting from an aria from Faust called the Flower Song, and it is a scene where Charlie, who's a pseudo floor walker, starts watering some flowered hats. Historically, then, what I call the middle period films, which start really with number 4, where Charlie makes the plots almost irrelevant. He's interested in developing a theme. So you have a theme of what it's like to be in a film studio, what it's like to be a drunk man, a favorite characterization of the young Charlie, which I'm sure was part of his music hall act. He was well known for it. A man alone in a house, very drunk, very late, having to cope with all the sort of rather rebellious rugs and staircases and clocks in the house in 1 a.m. Just the basic theme, forming a sort of source for it. A pawn shop, not much of a plot, a little bit of a plot at the end, but mostly just gags, sure, and so on. And then you come to something, the final group of Easy Street, Immigrant, and the last of the films, the Adventurer, where he achieves an incredible synthesis between the Joker, gags, of course, very, very funny, but always within the plot, always synthesized into a plot that has these funny things, but basically is coherent. So it's a plot propelled by the jokes, and those are really masterpieces. Those are really something we really treasure as major films. And at the end of it, we see Charlie ready for the world, ready to be a filmmaker and to embark on the half feature, what I call half features, like A Dog's Life and Shoulder Arms and The Pilgrim, and ready to take on full-length features like The Kid and The Gold Rush. And so we get him from, dying to try out everything in the world, very amazingly good contract, and his own company, complete artistic freedom, and working his way through and evolving film by film his own style. That's what you get when you watch them in order of their making. It's very odd that when talkies came in, when sound came in, and Chaplin began to record his own scores, he also looked after the sound effects as well, which was obviously available to him on real film. And studying his own score, starting with The City Lights of 1930, he's very sparing about it. He doesn't do every single fall or dropping or smash or bang or whatever, or even phone. He's very, very selective in so that when you get an effect, it's very choice. It's really effective. Whereas in fact, if he did what would have been a purely naturalistic soundtrack, it would be smothered with effects and lose their potency. But if you actually select, something like in the Adventurer, the fact that there's a whole sequence of people hitting each other's butts, and in fact, at one point, I thought of a sequence as being a concerto for piano and kicks. So the pianist, who's the leading lady, is playing very soulfully, and Charlie and the heavy are busy smashing each other in the butt. And so with just the two instruments, of the bass drum and the piano, you achieve something very sort of located, and it's got a space around it. It's as if the kick is a musical instrument of its own. And I'm very conscious of that it isn't, the effects are not to simply make it feel real. It's actually to make a dramatic point each time. And I don't do everything they do, not everything. I try and say, how does it work as part of the score? Integrated into the score. And in a film like The Adventurer, for instance, which starts out as a full-scale Keystone Cops and robbers chase, Charlie as an escaped convict, fleeing fleeing from the police, in which there's gunshots galore and flops and all sorts of wonderful things. At the same time, my composed score, aside from the gunshots, which I thought were necessary, but always I make them. It's not. I didn't go to a disc for a gunshot. I actually made it on an instrument. So I have another principle, which is that in those days, in a grand theater that would have had an orchestra and so on, they also would have had a team of sound effects men who were working behind the screen to again give you this reality of the shot. So you would have had these gunshots produced in a posh theater, and so I felt that would be legitimate to do what we could make. And so this film being a bit of a thriller about it, I thought perhaps one could be a little more full with my sound effects, but try to integrate them into the score. But what I was saying about the beginning of the film is I had to take this chase seriously. The man is a condemned man. We don't know much about why he was in jail. In fact, nothing about why he was in jail. But he's running for his life, and so it seemed to me that musically, it had to have dramatic tension. It should feel serious, to feel and have some weight. And I used Beethoven as my inspiration. Beethoven was an incredibly dramatic composer, and it isn't that I quote a bit of it. I develop a bit of a phrase, which is from a Beethoven piano concerto. But it's fabulous. That phrase is fabulous, and then I go on into my own development of it. In fact, I didn't actually look up anything. I just did it from memory, and so it was very important to start the film as if it was going to be, and it is, a really strong dramatic film, so that when you get the lighter moments, which is the kind of second half of the film, which is set at a house party, you come now to another very important theme that runs through all of Chaplin's film. Here's Chaplin, who came from nothing. I mean, his parents were, yes, they were in the theater, so that meant they had a certain amount of cultural experience, but they vanished on him. They abandoned him, really. And so he came from just nothing. There was nothing he ever learned in a legitimate way. He could play the violin a little bit because he watched somebody. He didn't have lessons. He could play the cello. He convinced you that he was a classical ballet dancer, but he could only have done it through observation. He didn't go to class, and so it was this variety world, I think, that really did turn him on. He does have these extraordinary moments in both The Floor, the very first film, and in The Cure. And what it is, how he uses this suddenly going into pirouettes and entrechats, it's if he's in a corner. If he's cornered, there's no way out. He's being confronted by a real heavy. He's going to get punched, and the thing is, what can I do to shock them? And the most shocking thing he could think of is to go into a classical ballet passage, and then it doesn't work. He gets hit anyway, or he just abandons it in The Cure. But it is, and my pleasure. When you hit a sequence where people, and there's a lot of dancing in the film, a lot of social dancing in the film, in these films, is to make it feel as if what we're playing is being played. That's it. That's what he's dancing to. And here we are looking at the Venture, and suddenly there's a three-piece ensemble: drums, violin, and piano here, and they're doing. It's a house party, and they're very posh folk, and they've hired a trio to come and play for their party. And they're dancing. It's very, very witty dance, and that's why I do a little ragtime, little sedate ragtime for it. In the Cure, where the water of this spa has been polluted by bottles of whiskey, which are Charlie's, thrown into them. There's a party there, which obviously is meant to be very sedate, and suddenly turns into a real jazz orgy, with where all the clients, the patients at the spa have all been drinking whiskey, and have a wonderful wild party. So yes, there is what we call source music, which is a in film term for when you actually see music coming from a source, either in a live band, and when you have that situation of a house party, even if you go away from the band, it seems important that you continue the music as if the band were audible. So here we are looking at outside the room where the musicians are, but I try and then write cohesive dance. Like this is accompanied by a waltz, and which they might have played a waltz at that time. So something conspicuously that could be in the repertoire of that band. With some touches and a bit of a zing sound when you get to ice cream being too cold for Charlie's poor gums. At this very moment, I'm preparing a score for a ballet based on the life of the famous Russian dancer Nijinsky. And it so happened that while Charlie was in the middle of filming these 12, the Ballet Russe was on tour this is 1916, and played Los Angeles, and Charlie went to see them and was very, being already a star, was introduced to Nijinsky, and he was so very, very impressed with the qualities in Nijinsky's dancing, and invited him to spend a day in his studio. And the film he was making at the time was The Cure, and so those remarks that you told me about is that
you definitely see the balletic
influence. He thought, and they both had enormous respect for each other as dancers. Sure. He thought Charlie is directly quoted as saying that you are a dancer. The story develops rather interestingly because Nijinsky was really not having a good time. He was leading a company for which he was not equipped in any way to deal with practical matters, and was attacked really by quite a deep depressions, and he got very, very depressed as the day rolled on and so on. And Charlie had to simply say that he had to go, that he simply could not produce comedy with someone who seemed to be suicidally depressed in front of the performers. So I mean, that's a terribly sad thing. But certainly, in fact, the entire genre of silent film, and especially composed music or music brought in that would be appropriate, it is very like writing a ballet, and I always think of that. I mean, ballet is one of my great loves, and it seemed to me that I have written 12 short ballets. with just a feel, if you have a feel for the image or the rhythm of the piece, you can get it so it looks as if they are actually moving to the music. If you could have a sensitivity to the rhythm they're working in. Oddly enough, the film studios used to use music in the filming. And presumably Charlie did, certainly when there was a dance sequence or he wanted musicians in sight. But he didn't use music in the same way. If he was working it out, he wouldn't use it just to create a mood. He probably, as a director, he could get the actors to do what he wanted. So that's quite unique, because the studios did rely on music a lot to put actors in the mood. But these long emotional scenes in Charlie's career were to come when he made things like The Kid, but that was not his practice anyway. It seemed to me that these 12 films are a cohesive whole. Each one has subtractions, and you can have your favorites, this one, that one, but in fact they really are a piece. Charlie used his own life as the subject.